incredibly privileged today to have Commissioner Stern here with us. Really one of, the principal architects of the sports industry today. I think everybody agrees that he set the gold standard for leading a sports organization and taking the NBA to phenomenal heights and handing it off to a great successor, Adam Silver, who has built on his tremendous foundation. So as he and I have discussed, I'm sure he'll tell you he's open to any questions, any topic that you have about the industry, about basketball, about the NBA, and he's going to talk about a lot of his experiences, in some cases quite related to the things we've read about trust law, labor law, intellectual property, collective bargaining, and so forth. And so I know you didn't come here this morning to hear me, so I'm going to turn it over to him, and
Thank you.
there we go.
Okay, and I just want to reiterate, if there's something that's either not clear or you want to ask a question on this subject, just shout it out. So how long do I have to fill this? How much time do I have to fill?
An hour and a half.
Perfect. Okay. I was hoping that I could go for 3 days.
Yeah.
Okay, I graduated law school in 1966 and joined the Proskauer firm, which wasn't known then as a sports law firm, but now is. And lo and behold, they just happened to have as a client the National Basketball Association. I'm not even sure I knew that when I joined them. And I got this wonderful experience of working on so many things. If you read about the history of the NBA, including the ABA, which was formed thereafter, including litigation between the NBA and the ABA, including litigation between the NBA and the Players Association, all under the banner of antitrust litigation. I was a litigator, and in a really unique way, including a case by the name of Connie Hawkins versus the NBA, who had been barred from being taken in the NBA draft because he had accepted some money from a gentleman by the name of Jack Molinas during the summer before he was going off to the University of Iowa. And I got to know, because I was looking backwards as well as forward as I was defending depositions, all of the iconic names, none of whom you know or should know, but were owners back in the 50s and early 60s, etc. And the main thrust of the litigation, everything the NBA did was alleged to be illegal, because under the antitrust laws, what you need is an agreement. And the commissioner of the NBA acts only by agreement of all of the number of teams that there are. So the requisite agreement was there, and somebody is always impacted. Plaintiff's lawyers would say harmed by the agreement of all the owners to do something. And then the question simply becomes, under the rule of reason, if you can get that far rather than make it per se illegal, whether that was a reasonable restraint or not that you adopted. And for years, in the Robertson case, we litigated about the legality of the draft, the waiver system, the series of allocations and the like. And of course, on behalf of the league, we argued that it was purely legal, and we likened it to various other businesses. Like the draft was like you went down to shape up for the Teamsters. You went to a hiring hall and people were selected and said, "Oh, that's us." And then when it came time to argue about what I would say the single enterprise theory, we argued correctly, even though the courts didn't agree, that if Cadillac and Oldsmobile, who are both divisions of General Motors, aren't held to have conspired, then our teams shouldn't be held to conspire when they hire a commissioner and they enact various rules of law. We argued unsuccessfully, and I'm sure you have seen this, that the labor laws preempted the antitrust laws on all matters relating to terms and conditions of employment. We use all kinds of phrases like permissive subject of collective bargaining and mandatory subject of collective bargaining. We said, look, Judge, these are mandatory subjects of collective bargaining. They affect the employment of the players completely. Let's just, declare these legal, or at least not subject to the antitrust laws. The first response by a court was in 1974 when a very good judge and a nice man, Robert L. Carter, said that we must have been trying to catch him sleepwalking because our argument was so preposterous. That how something that was illegal could be shielded by the labor laws. I will tell you that 20 years later, but that's a long time to wait, the Supreme Court said we were right. Anything that was or could be a subject of collective bargaining, said the court, was indeed covered by the labor exemption in the antitrust laws and was a subject for bargaining and not for litigation. But lo and behold, in 1974, Judge Carter didn't agree, and we settled the case in '76. It was totally bizarre. We settled with the players, and we insisted that whatever we put into the so-called Robertson Settlement Agreement had to be in an accompanying collective bargaining agreement. Litigation, collective bargaining, players said it was a litigation settlement, we said it was a collective bargaining agreement, and we decided not to fight about it, we just put it in both. And every amendment after that, every subsequent collective bargaining agreement was somehow, until more recently when collective bargaining agreement just took over, was a collectively bargained and a settlement in the litigation, and that's where we were. And gradually, this banging of heads, the NHL had a lawsuit from, I guess it was the World League of Hockey, and suits by their players. The NFL had the famed Mackey case and a litigation from its players in the same way.
Which these guys read and could recite to you verbatim. But you won't ask them.
No, I'm not going to. It's, but they settled Mackey on the same terms as we settled. And you know what was interesting about that, and I may squash my ears a little bit, but in the Mackey, when the head of the union suggested to the NFL owners that they should share revenue with the players, the owners locked them out. And really, I would say, won the battle at that point. I forget even the year, but gradually it came to be the Mackey settlement. My owners had for years insisted that we had to have a salary cap. And the players laughed at them, and that's totally ridiculous. And in fact, at one point, after we had settled Robertson, when we proposed a salary cap, the union went to court to say that it was illegal for us to even propose a salary cap. So you could see what the tension was between union and management. Everything was a litigation. Along the way, and this is a little bit of an insight into collective bargaining, one day I was at lunch with the then head of the union, Larry Fleischer, and I said, Larry, I got a really wonderful idea. Why don't you propose that we share revenue with us, that we share revenue with you, and I'll propose, or someone will propose, Larry O'Brien may be commissioner then, that you agree to a salary cap. And that way we'll come up with something that's workable, so that the cap won't be used to deprive you of a certain percentage of the revenue. And Larry said, Dave, it's not time yet. So we went about banging our heads against the wall, fighting with the union, denouncing each other. But then in one negotiating session, about at least a year later, owners said, we need a salary cap because the spending is crazy. And Fleischer says, well, would you ever consider sharing revenue with the players? Bingo. And that's how we wound up ultimately having a deal that said the players would get guaranteed a certain percentage of the gross. And the way that we delivered that was through a system that required teams to either spend a lot of money or a certain amount of money, but with a cap on the amount that any one team could spend, with certain exceptions, because honestly, we didn't want the cap to be used as a basis for breaking up teams. So Boston, for example, at the time, so I'm thinking 83 it must have been, had a Hall of Fame team, gentlemen by the name of Parrish, Bird, McHale, Dennis Johnson, Danny Ainge, whatever they were. And the Lakers had a similarly destined Hall of Fame team. Kareem, Worthy, Cooper, Nixon. I'm leaving someone out. Oh, maybe it's because Rampus, he wasn't in the Hall of Fame. Everyone else was. I know Nixon. And Magic. There's this guy named Magic Johnson. I left him out. And we didn't want to say, all right, the cap is in, you got to get rid of these players. I didn't want to be a part of that. And that was an owner-inspired exception. So we had what became known as a soft cap. You could exceed the cap to retain your own player. And that's how it came into being. We got it, but be careful what you wish for, because we didn't want it to be so hard that we had to break up teams. And I guess to this day, the cap is sort of soft. And what happened in subsequent years was we put in a tax, so when a team exceeded a certain level by virtue of signing all of its free agents and going through the roof, think Golden State next year or whatever they do, there was a huge tax bill to pay. That was what was progressive. You know, if it was 50 cents per dollar over a certain amount, $1 for dollar, you know, $2. I think it got up to $4 for $1. It was really punishment. It was retribution, really, to keep teams from overspending. And this all comes from an inherent fear when you're managing a professional sports league that the teams, we used to call the teams on the East and West coasts, that's code for New York and LA, have unlimited sums of money. And they can spend that money to amass the best teams. Think EPL in English soccer, where there are going to be 6 teams that share the spoils regularly, and they're going to be in the Champions League or the UEFA competition, and the other teams are there just for sport, so to speak, but it's a different kind of sport. We were of the fundamental belief that what we were selling was competition, and we were looking for the holy grail, which was a well-managed team can compete in our league. And that's what led to a cap, that's what led to revenue sharing, that's what led to the tax, that's what underlies our draft, based on the worst team picks first. And if you're interested, I'm rooting for the Nets because I don't think the process is as good as everyone says it is in Philadelphia. They deserve a losing gestalt because the process, tanking is a bad thing. My friends in Philadelphia don't agree with me, but that's a whole separate issue. But all of the sports rules are geared towards competition. And that's the product that we sell, and that's the product that we have argued to courts that we sell. So think about everything in the context of not 2 teams competing with each other. We compete on the court, but we don't compete because we're partners in this overarching business. And what we try to do is put competition on the floor to make it as interesting as we can. I guess I was rewarded for my efforts by being made commissioner, or punished, depending upon what you want to think. And I became commissioner on Feb 1, 1984. Keep in mind, when I joined the NBA as its general counsel, In '78, I was its 24th employee. We had, and as late as '81, our finals were on tape delay in the East on CBS. And I think by and '84, even after Larry and Magic had come into the league, we were making a relatively small, by current day standards, amount on television, and we only have 4 or 5 games on CBS Network. And we were climbing out. And the interesting thing is that by that time, the fight had become about, the fights that we were having with the players were by and large turned to arbitrations under the master collective bargaining agreement. Discipline, things like that. We were, much less protective. I was much less protective of the commissioner's prerogatives than the NFL commissioner was. So when Latrell Sprewell thought it was a good idea for him to strangle the coach of the Golden State Warriors, or when Ron Artest thought it was a good idea to go into the stands and beat the crap out of some drunk fan who had thrown beer at him, we by that time had agreed that anything above a certain number of games by suspension was to be reviewed by an arbitrator. I didn't want the responsibility, honestly. And that has worked to our advantage. I remember the arbitrator asking me whether I thought, because Latrell was suspended for a year from like December to December, and the arbitrator said to me, do I think it would be easier for him to get a job the next season if he were not suspended, if his suspension ended before training camp or something like that? And I knew where that was going, so with a wink and a nod, I said, yes, I think that's true. And so he commuted the penalty to basically the first season that we had suspended him for, but he was then signed to play in the next year. And the same thing was true. I think the arbitrator did something in the Artest case, not for Ron, but for Steven Jackson, who I had suspended for 35 games, and I think he cut it back to 25 games. It's all, it's all hocus pocus, I must say. Some of it is, some of it you just have to make statements somehow. If you were watching the game between Philadelphia and the Nets on Saturday afternoon, I don't know, I have another life, but I don't know, but I'm still drawn to the TV set to watch these games. You would have seen the Nets and the 76ers rolling into the crowd, where one father was held up as a hero because he grabbed his young son and ran onto the court to get him out of the rampaging players' way. When Carmelo Anthony did the same thing some years ago when he was playing for Denver, where they broke up a fight, and then he came back, and there was a big fight, and it rolled into the fans in the front row. I suspended him for 10 games. I think you have to protect the fan-player boundary. The best thing that our sport has in basketball is how close you are to the fans. And I just don't believe that any of us, coaches, owners, management, commissioners, players particularly, should endanger that viewing experience, because it really is unique. And so I tried my best to protect that, and the players knew what was going on. I was very, very deliberative, and we were deliberative in protecting the intellectual property of the league. We paid a high minimum guarantee to the Players Association, so we would have the right to go to sponsors with the group license, which the Players Association, let's say, owns. We bought it from them for a minimum guarantee, I think it was $25 million a year, when $25 million was real money. And we went to sponsors and said we can deliver the NBA, its logos, and the group rights to the players. And group rights usually means you get a license to use 6 or more players, and that's the basis upon which we make trading card deals, we make jersey deals with Adidas and Nike and others under the so-called group license. And video game deals the same way. Although the business there has completely changed. But we were very protective of our rights and the players' rights. I'm laughing thinking about it because at one point, in a case I think you read, the NBA sued Stats Inc. I think Squadron was playing for the other side then, I'm not sure.
It was before my time.
Oh, okay. And our previously unique legal theory, as espoused by the crazy in the corner office, or maybe I was the general counsel, I don't even remember, was that the Stats Inc. was taking the results of our game, which it got through the television, and was selling it to pagers, the Motorola pager. I think we sued Stats Inc. and Motorola. And our theory was the accounts of our game belong to us. We license someone to come in and deliver it by video. We license someone to come in and deliver it by radio. And there was an old case called the Pittsburgh Pirates baseball case, where someone across the street from, must have been Forbes Field, the old, before there was a Heinz or some other, before we sold names to stadium and arena, where somebody sat there with a pencil and they would hit the mic and say, you know, it's a hit to right field and the runners are running, and they were recreating the game, and the court enjoined that because those radio accounts were the property of the team. And we said, naturally enough, that there's something called the statistical account of the game. It's our intellectual property. That's another way of expressing the result. And we actually got a federal judge in the Southern District of New York to enter an injunction against Stats Inc. and Motorola, I guess. Of course, that decision was reversed by the Second Circuit Court of Appeals on a day of infamy. And in the decision, it wasn't the basis of the decision, but in the decision is a line by the judge there, and I can't be too mad at him because he was very helpful on the labor exemption to the antitrust laws. I think it was Judge Jacobs. He said something like, well, this doesn't matter anyway. Statistics are not important. Well, there's another session I'm doing this afternoon on technology, and let me tell you, statistics are a whole big business. They support lots of people in Genius Sport, Sport Radar, Perform, Associated Press, ESPN.com, you name it. Sports statistics are the new battlefield, especially with legalized gambling coming down the pike on sporting events, jurisdiction by jurisdiction by jurisdiction. But anyway, that just shows you we were so intent, and we sued everybody. It's great when there are lawyers around.
Can I interrupt you for a second? Because
sure,
we
please.
did spend a lot of time
do.
discussing that case and the fact that the court ruled that under copyright law, the reason Stats and Motorola would be able to move ahead was that it was the underlying facts, much like ideas, as opposed to any kind of work of authorship or creative effort. Do you think today they were wrong?
Yes,
You do?
I do. I think that just like bringing together an orchestra of 47 people, the Philharmonic, to make beautiful music, we made beautiful games. We make beautiful games. And the result of that is the creation of a video and statistics, etc., that we are the authors of with our players. I think there's a point of view of the players. Of course, when I call the general counsel, the current general counsel, to yell at him, because that's what I do, they say, go sit in your corner, David. I have an office separate and apart from the NBA in a way of up the block on Fifth Avenue. But I call to taunt the current general counsel, Rick Buchanan, he said, "Oh, it's gotten much worse than that. There are cases that have been litigated in the player realm, and that the players have no rights. Their likenesses can be used for gambling. Their likenesses can be used for anything they want, you know, and because the facts underlying the rights and who they are underlying, you know, it's like it's in the public domain. I think that's a road ill taken, because on behalf of the players, I think that it isn't just about using the players to advertise your supermarket or your whatever. These people are doing the same thing in a certain way by using it to base an entire betting business on it. But it is what it is. So we pack up and we soldier on and we wait for the next confrontation. I'll give you an idea, and then I'll get off the subject of our intensity. Driven by the nut in the corner office, there was the New York Times suddenly started selling photos that its photographers had taken at our games. You could buy it at NewYorkTimes.com. So we called up the New York Times. I actually spoke to Arthur Sulzberger Jr. and said, you know, you don't have the right to sell those, because if you look at the back of the media pass that we give to photographers at NBA games, it says for purposes of reporting. We didn't give you a blanket license to take photos to sell. And he sort of laughed at me, so we sued him. State court. You know, it's sort of like the refrain. So we sued him in state court, and Arthur, he hired David Boyce of Boyce and Schiller. David argued with Gore v.
Push.
Gore v. Bush. I mean, David is like a big player in the legal world, and that was supposed to make us afraid. And our legal opponent was saying, these guys don't understand. David is relishing this confrontation. What's wrong with them? So we said, okay, and Boyce comes in and he tries to remove the federal court, claims we're just an antitrust violation waiting to happen, and we sort of brought in the troops. And one day the phone rings, it's Arthur Sulzberger Jr. You know, David, this is costing us a lot of money. You too, I'm sure. Oh, sure, Arthur. I think we should settle. I said, okay, come on in. So he came in with the publisher, and we made a deal. We authorized them to sell photography, and as long as we split it with them, 50-50. We modified the license for them. And guess how much photography they sold since then? And that's okay with us, because that's Getty Images we have a deal with, and other places that we have a deal with. I guess there's one more point I'm going to make, one more litigation, because I always said to the owners that the next plaintiff is probably in this room. So if someone from in this room of governors and teams wants to take us on, either they have to kill us, because absolutely there's nothing else makes sense. And the Chicago Bulls were televising their games on WGN, which was one of the original so-called superstations, being seen throughout the nation. And the Bulls were a somewhat popular team. And we put in a rule that said that if your viewing audience is at a certain percentage above, if your viewing audience is more outside your local area than within, you're limited to 25 games to televise locally. If you can split the feed, you can sell other ones outside, but if that very feed has to be 25 games in your area. And the Bulls and WGN sued us, and they prevailed in the Chicago District Court, and we took it up. Is the 6th Circuit or the 7th Circuit? 7th Circuit. We took it up, and they reversed the judge below and sent it back for another trial. Little did I know that the trial judge was a neighbor of one of the owners of the Bulls, but we'll leave that aside for the matter, because I still believe in the sanctity of courts and justice. And my wife would say, "Are you kidding? You're in Chicago and you think you're going to get with the Bulls and you're going to get a decision?" "Oh, don't worry, honey." So we tried it again and we lost. We took it up and it got reversed and sent back again. And then the Tribune Company said, and basically it raised the specter that they might be doing something illegal and owe us damages, what they're about to do. And they said, "We're not going to televise Bulls games this year." And I said, "Guys, don't get so excited. Let's make a deal." And we made a deal, which still exists today. If you look, I think they have the right to carry 10 Bulls games on WGN. So if any of you have WGN on your cable systems, that you'll see that there is an occasional Chicago Bulls game on there, and we made the deal. It only cost the NBA approximately $25 million in legal fees and costs and expenses. But if you're managing a group of very independent thinkers, each of whom has gotten wealthy in the business that they were running, that enabled them to spend the money to buy a team, they have to, understand that it's a team, that being in a league is a team game, and that there are rules that people don't like at a given time, and commissioners are stuck with having to enforce them. And if you don't have it, then you're gone. And so and gradually, what happened was, in 1979, 80, I guess it was, this wonderful thing called cable came to be. And lo and behold, although we only had 4 million cable households at that moment, in making the deal for the NBA, because I was such a marketing genius, I decided that we wouldn't go with a company called the Entertainment and Sports Programming Network, because, said I, who would watch 24 hours of sports on something that was soon to be renamed ESPN, which at the time was carrying field hockey, volleyball, probably curling.
Australian rules football.
Australian rules football. Okay, I watched the grand finale, they call it, at the Council General's house in New York one year. I was the opposite of Groucho Marx. Groucho Marx used to say that he wouldn't join any country club that would have him as a member. And I used to say, I'll go any place that would have the NBA, because that's how hard it was. We had some serious problems at the time. But at that moment, on USA Network, which was the highest rated television network at the time, we had a doubleheader on Thursday nights. So we could say we were in prime time, even though we had a very limited exposure on CBS. I think the ultimate lesson was brought home to me. It must have been like 84, 85. When the NFL players were locked out, I called the head of CBS Sports and said, "I got an idea. We got a game that Sunday. Would you like it?" And he said, "No, we have something else." I said, "Can I ask what it is?" "Yeah. St. John's is playing the Czechoslovakian national team." Okay. It was designed to make you feel really good. And then there were certain problems we had at the time. The LA Times decided to write a story that 75% of NBA players were on drugs. And that was a problem. And we were really dealing with I think, and it's kind of interesting as you think about sports, we were dealing with a relatively racist society. There are some people who say it hasn't changed that much. But from a sports perspective, I would say to you that it has. It's not where it has to get to, but it has. We made a deal with our union. Bob Lanier was the president of the union in 1983, and after we finished the collective bargaining details, we had agreed to put drugs to the side And he said, okay, let's talk about drugs. I said to Bob, all right, what do you want? We find someone who's using drugs. What do you want to do? So Bob says, let's throw him out of the league for life. And I said, that's a little harsh. You know, the quality of mercy is not strained. You know, let's sit back and work on this. So we came up with a plan that was big on education, allowed us to test if we had reasonable cause to test, establish it through some arbitrator, blah, blah, blah. And, but if we tested you and you hadn't, and if you came forward, it was okay, we put you into the program, you could continue playing. But if you didn't come forward and we caught you, you would then be banned, quote, for life, but you could reapply after 2 years if you were clean and you were doing it. And so, for whatever it's worth, I take either credit or responsibility for being a little bit less harsh than some people would have been in terms of, in terms of drug use.
But can I interrupt you there? Sorry.
Sure,
Because,
go ahead.
I mean, you talked about how you were very tough on that line on the court when, protecting the fans, ensuring that you were a little bit more flexible, maybe than some might have been on how to deal with substance abuse. These days, for example, things like domestic abuse, that kind of violence are a big issue. I mean, how do you sort of calibrate these things as a commission?
I would like to say about that, and I may be an old-fashioned white guy, but I think that there's something that exists called the digital lynch mob. And if a player is accused of something, everyone wants to know, why is he playing this week? Don't you know he was accused of something? And I grew up at a time when this unusual thing called due process meant that if a player was accused, there would be a court process, and if he was convicted, he would have to deal with the results. And if he wasn't, then he wasn't guilty of it. So, and maybe I was wrong. Like when Allen Iverson was a rookie, he was going down the New Jersey Turnpike at 95 miles an hour, stopped. There was a gun under the seat, under the shotgun seat, and a bag of marijuana in the glove compartment, which he said were his cousins. So we waited for the ultimate adjudication, and the court said they dismissed it, and that's the way it worked. It never went to trial. Now, a player was accused of domestic violence. I think he was a San Francisco 49er, and the pressure was enormous on the 49ers to not play him on that day, and he denied that he had engaged in domestic violence. It's a different time, so everyone's running scared, and I understand it, but it's a different filter, and maybe I'm wrong, but it makes me wince a little bit when that happens, because the charges remain unproven, especially if the alleged perpetrator is denying the allegation. He should be given his day in court before the league swoops down and does something terrible to him with respect to his livelihood. Is that
No, yeah, Mark.
Do you think people instigate more wrongdoings by players like nowadays than like it used to be?
Do I think people instigate?
Like wrongdoings, do you think people try to like find out more about players now than they used to be? Or it's like a similar
I
thing?
think, yeah. I think that it's,
Were there more things that would like come up?
this is a fraught time. I'm gonna tread very carefully. My wife is on my shoulder, so I have to be careful here. So, did everyone see that Luke Walton was accused in the age of Me Too of doing something? I'm not sure exactly what it was. I think it was
They said it was sexual misconduct.
sexual misconduct, and so his reputation is ruined. There it goes. I think that people are watching players more closely than they did. And in the age of sports betting, without giving away my fire for the fourth session that Squadron here is gonna beat out of me today.
We're just gonna keep them busy.
Right. You know, information is king. If I know that player X had a fight with his wife in the restaurant and they yelled at each other, I may bet against them, or maybe I should bet for him, I'm not sure which. But, you know, people are gonna be looking for every edge about information. And so it's gonna get much, much worse in terms of the intensity of what players are under. No doubt about it. And if you wanna kick up a storm, the media is more than willing, and everyone's going, you know, and so we're gonna adjust. There'll be an equilibrium that ultimately comes when you, did I say that I started on February 1, '84, and I ended on February 1, 2014. So if you subtract, it's 30 years I was commissioner. So I've seen a lot, and you see it the way it goes. But I will say this. The collective bargaining agreement that we made in '83 and the drug deal that came out of it really sort of supercharged our growth. People don't give it enough credit. Because as I traveled the country as a new commissioner, people said thank you. And what happened was, the assumption was that the reason NBA players were involved with drugs is because they're black and they're earning too much money. The average salary was like $250,000 a year. Okay? Think about that. And that was just a lot of baloney. And in fact, we had the first employee assistance program that I just described with drugs. And it turns out that drugs were a huge problem in this country. The so-called war on drugs. There were drugs in the hospitals, there were drugs in law firms, there were drugs in schools, there were drugs in police stations, there were drugs in jail. And so we were just the beginning of the drug phase, and people began to appreciate the fact that we had addressed it. But the answer to your question is yes, I think that there's more scrutiny on athletes than ever before. And it's an interesting, it's a subject for a whole other course. You'll invite me back when you decide to do that course on social responsibility and the like. I will say two things that I learned along the way. I'll tell you 50 things along the way. One, in 1981, when I was executive vice president and not yet commissioner, I suggested to then Commissioner Larry O'Brien that we should do something novel. We should record our games. Duh. We bought every team a 3/4-inch VCR. You guys remember what a VCR is? It's something that's in a museum now. A Panasonic VCR. And we recorded every game by hooking the VCR into the broadcast truck and giving someone $25 to put the 2.5 or 3 tapes that came out in a FedEx envelope and send it to Secaucus, New Jersey, where we hired loggers who would log every single frame of every game. And then, so you could ask for Michael Jordan on a Tuesday in a visiting uniform going to his left. We had it. And then we had to get temperature-controlled storage bins to hold the tapes. And then we had to digitize them, which is a whole other thing. And now, there's a goddamn Israeli company that I'm an investor in that just did with artificial intelligence out of the air. Live, real-time video highlights. So everything we did in 1982 between then and now is ridiculous. It doesn't hold any water anymore. My life's work up in ruins. But it's just fascinating. And that's what's happening to a lot of things in sports. I mentioned public social responsibility in social sports. It's sort of not on the agenda. The agenda for this talk is antitrust, arbitration, union, intellectual property, etc. But let me talk a little bit about social responsibility, and then I want you to shout out whatever you want me to talk about. Well, just keep going indefinitely. In 1991,
Yeah, sometimes the classroom shakes.
Magic Johnson announced that he was HIV positive. It was stunning. So 91, 101, 11. Was anyone here, was there anyone here old enough beside Bill to have been alive when Magic Johnson announced he was HIV positive? Okay. We knew that Magic was going to die. That's how, it was a bombshell. It was on the front page of every newspaper in the world. Repeat, in the world. The beloved Magic Johnson was HIV positive. And somehow he was the catalyst for involving the world in a conversation about HIV. We hired the best doctors we could to advise us on AIDS. We had from Central Casting, Paul Malone, who was playing for the Utah Jazz at the time, announced that he wasn't going to play against them. Frank called. The Australian Olympic team said in 1992 at the Barcelona games they weren't going to play against the U.S. team if Magic was there. And we said, no, he's playing. And in fact, in the All-Star game, I think it was that year, I said he was eligible to play even though he had retired. And lo and behold, he won the vote. And Tim Hardaway, who was at the Miami Heat at the time, stepped aside to let Magic take his place. And then, I still get chills talking about it. Magic hit the last shot of the game, a three-pointer. He was the MVP of the game, and I got an opportunity to hug him. And people, you just weren't supposed to hug people who were HIV positive. But there was no shot that sweat could transmit HIV. Not possible. We knew it, we believed it, and we lived it. And people came to accept the fact that that was the fact. And that was because of Magic Johnson, with a little help from his friends at the NBA. And there were Nickelodeon shows of Magic with little kids, and the girl was crying because she was HIV positive, and she felt shunned, etc. And we had a speaker at that All-Star game my wife did, whose name was Elizabeth something from the Pediatric AIDS Society. She had AIDS because she had a bad transfusion when her son was born with blood that was HIV, where it was HIV positive. And at the end of her speech, the mother of one of the executives who was getting ready to present the MVP with the trophy of the All-Star game had said to him, if it's Magic, don't shake hands with him. And she got up at this afterwards and started crying in the gathering where the speech had taken place, feeling so terrible that she was going to start working on behalf of HIV/AIDS patients. And all of that, I mean, that's just close in our sort of narrow family, but it had ramifications around the world. And Magic was one of the first people who was getting these cocktails of protease inhibitors. And lo and behold, he's alive. He's not such a good GM, but I can tell him that, and I have. But that's neither here nor there. I love him, and when I put my hands around him about a year ago, I said, Magic, I can't get my hands around you. What's going on here? He says, the next time I saw him, he said, I lost 30 pounds so you can get your hands around me, big guy. So we have a very good relationship. He's a good man. The other thing I want to say is in 1993, I had the honor of leading a delegation to South Africa. Nelson Mandela had been let out of Robben Island, but he wasn't yet president of South Africa. And we were questioning whether we should go or not go. A lot of players dropped out, but we were told that the ANC approved of this trip, and that as proof of that, Nelson Mandela would stop by at dinner. So I said, okay, that works for me. And so I said to my wife, we're going. We can't, you know, if we're asking players to go, we're going too. And it was a dangerous time. And lo and behold, the head of our security division calls up to our hotel room and says, Mr. Mandela wants to visit with you. And I had the opportunity, which tells you something about sports, to spend 45 minutes with Nelson Mandela. It was incredible. I mean, and he said a couple of things. Number one, which I didn't know, some things I knew or felt. One, he said, I'm glad you didn't bring books, because our kids don't know how to read. As part of the resistance, we kept them out of school. I did not put two and two together. That struck me as unusual. And then he said, but I'm so glad you're here, because I believe that sports can bring people together. Am I allowed to mention that our president doesn't believe that?
As an aside.
Okay, as an aside, our president doesn't believe that because he uses sports to separate people and has been kicking the crap out of the NFL and its players. And that's exactly the opposite of how sports should be used. And Mandela lived that. If you've seen the movie Invictus, and if you haven't, I recommend it. Here, after he was president, over the objections of some of his aides, he went to root for almost exclusively white South African rugby team in the World Cup. And that was very moving. And he believed that. And so, you know, and he said, do you have any questions for me? I said, yeah, why are you sitting here so calmly? Why aren't you angrier than you're currently projecting? And he said, well, if you had been here 5 years ago, I would have been in Robben Island. If you came here 2 years ago, I'd be out and they'd be consulting me. You're here now and they take no action without consulting me, and if you come back next year, I'm going to be president, so I'm feeling pretty good about this. And he may have been the only person that could have kept South Africa going in the way that it, you know, was going. It's had some fractures recently, but there was great fear on the global stage that that country would fracture and there'd be a civil war, you name it. But there wasn't. And those two incidents, Magic and President Mandela, have sort of informed us in the way we have gone about social responsibility, NBA cares, and the kinds of things that it's not unrelated to our sports mission. We always have, you know, at every all-star game, at every playoff city, at everything, we do something for the community because that's our obligation. It isn't because we're great people. We feel it's our job and our obligation to do something for the community. And sports does play a significant role in the way communities feel about themselves. I think it's overrated myself, but it does. I remember when we expanded into Charlotte in 1987 or 8, whenever it was, the headline in the Charlotte Observer says, "Charlotte, tonight we are Major League." That's because the Charlotte Hornets were there. I said, come on, you know, it's exactly the flip side. We're lucky to be accepted into Charlotte, but they were good guys, and you know, and that's the way teams are treated sometimes by their communities or their prospective communities. A couple of other things. Along the way, we started the WNBA, which I think is getting ready for either a 22nd or 23rd season. I started it as a business matter. Frankly, I was afraid for my life because on our staff was Val Ackerman, who was the first commissioner. She thought I was my special assistant, and she said she was going to kill me if we didn't start a women's league. And also Carol Blazejowski, who was one of the great shooters and players of all time. She played for Montclair State, and she was a great basketball player. So we did start the WNBA. And I learned a little bit about prejudice there, gender prejudice, because the sports writers, who were mostly male, just announced that it was going to fail. And, you know, and after about 1 or 2 years, when they said, well, it didn't fail the first year, it's gonna fail the second year, and it's gonna fail the third. And that's when I became a new age feminist. I didn't go into it thinking that this was about, to me, we had the opportunity to capture another market in the summertime, take fans away from baseball, and light up our buildings and have television program in the summertime. Very much a business decision. It was great fun to do it. We picked out logos and we had basketballs and all kinds of other things, and fighting some prejudices along the way. Prejudices by the women in our organization who wanted to use the identical ball to the color ball as the men's ball. And I said, come on, guys. You know, Spalding doesn't need another SKU to sell. There's one of 17 or 19 balls. Let's do oatmeal and orange rather than just orange. That was a success, actually, because then FIBA, for international games, adopted an oatmeal and orange ball as well. And so that was an interesting experience, and I'm very proud of our experience with the WNBA. And I think it will happen. It'll succeed over time.
Can I ask you about one thing you touched on earlier? And then I think we want to definitely open it up because I'm sure people here have questions. But you mentioned Philadelphia and the process and so forth. And, you know, I know you were a big part of the whole discussion about one and done. We've talked here about, you know, we've read the NCAA cases. We've talked about athlete compensation at the college level, the Condoleezza Rice Commission and what they're going to do. What are your thoughts about this whole difficult area?
I'm so glad you asked. First of all, the so-called Rice Commission punted on the two most important things they had to consider. One, should athletes get paid? Oh, we'll wait for the courts tour in the middle of deciding that. And two, on eligibility only at age 19, the league and the union should take care of that. Okay, Condoleezza, what else do you have to not decide? I think that I don't like one and done as a slogan to describe our rule. Our rule says you have to be 19 or a year removed from high school to be drafted into the NBA. My view was, at the time I led the negotiations, I'm told it was 2005, I'm not positive it was or wasn't. I wanted to get NBA scouts out of high school gyms and cause kids' friends to not tell them that you're the man, you should definitely go pro, you're good enough to do it. And then, you know, for every Kobe or Kevin Garnett, or LeBron even, there were other players who lost their way and never got a chance to participate in college. And in case anyone says to you, oh, someone should be able to do whatever he wants to do at whatever age he wants to do it, I think something called the U.S. Constitution has age limits in it. You have to be a certain age to be president. Why? There was some sense that there was a certain amount of maturity that a prospective candidate gets. And in my view, there was a certain amount of maturity, but more important, draft picks we knew were going to become more valuable, and as a result, you would have another year to see the player. And he doesn't have to go to college. This was not a social program designed to put players into college. This was a program that allowed them, like, I guess Mitchell Robinson is a center for the Knicks, and led them in block shots this season. He didn't go to college, and he was drafted when he was 19. Brandon Jennings played in Italy. Other players have played in college. I guess, I didn't notice, did Zion come out? I guess he did. Mm-hmm. So, you could do anything you wanted to do. I think the NCAA may be the most hypocritical organization in the world. It's just, its rules are all screwed up. Years ago, it used to be that it's terrible that young people are leaving school after their sophomore year, blah, blah, blah. they're afraid of getting hurt. So I went to the NCAA, head of the NCAA, and said, the NBA, let's agree that we'll select the top 20 or 25. We know who they are and who they're going to include. And we'll insure them for disability insurance. And those that get drafted will pay us back, and those that don't, it'll be our pleasure to have protected them against injury. And the NCAA came back and said, we could go with that, but you'd have to do it for every sport. Okay, because our rules require all athletes to be treated the same. That was ridiculous. Totally ridiculous. And now I think, and I don't know whether, it seems to me like the bottle has been uncorked. The NBA seems on a path to going back to the previous rule, is when you're 18 and have graduated from high school, you can play. You can be drafted. In my view, the NCAA should allow players that do that, even if they hired an agent, to go back to be drafted after the draft, and they've been drafted, they should let them play college ball anyway if they want to. What's the big deal? If the NCAA claims that it's so concerned about student athletes, they should allow that to happen. And so that if somebody comes into the G League when they're 18 and they're a bust and they can't play at that level, then let them go play in college. Let them, but the NCAA, oh no, they're professional. Come on, professional. You can go work for the summer or all year with a law firm, with an accounting firm, with the firm you're ultimately going to join, unless you're an athlete. And then the NCAA has a special set of rules for you. It's terrible. And on the issue of pay, clearly we're seeing it every day that I don't see how it can be avoided, athletes getting paid ultimately. When coaches are making $10 million a year, and a basketball tournament, March Madness, is making billions, and schools are making tens of millions, how do you get the source? How do you not somehow compensate in some fair way the source of that income? Now, if they had acted responsibly previously, we wouldn't be having this discussion. The notion that a scholarship player who can't afford to have his parents come and visit him isn't helped by the school or the NCAA is inhumane and preposterous. So the backlash will come eventually, and we'll see what happens about that. Okay. You're a witness, sir.
I was going to ask, do you have any idea how you would structure the payment for college athletes to something like bigger schools?
No. It's going to be a disaster if the players win, if the plaintiffs. The plaintiff's lawyer is someone I litigated against for years, Jeffrey Kessler. What they want to do is just make it flat out business. So the Power 5 conferences are going to get into a bidding war for the best players. That's going to make everyone uncomfortable. And I'm guessing that the cost of attendance is going to be redefined for a richer scholarship experience, books, housing, spending money, etc. I don't know that it should just be direct compensation, because there are certain schools that are always going to outbid the other schools. And I was interested to see last week that Coach K came out and said, the colleges are not ready for the elimination of one and done. What's up with that, Coach K? I guess he's doing pretty well with one and done, so maybe the longer it goes on, the longer Duke will be ascending. You're not supposed to say that in Carolina, okay? But that's an interesting issue. I sort of, yes, sir.
You said earlier that you were not a fan of tanking. And I was curious, on the opposite spectrum, what is your opinion on super teams? Do you think it's good or bad?
I usually deflect that question by saying when I became commissioner, there were two super teams. There was the Celtics and the Lakers, and it wasn't bad for the game any more than now. So and I think that the super team, it's kind of funny. There's sort of a remnant of society that doesn't like the fact that players are viewed and reported as controlling not only their own destiny, but coming together with other players. you know what? You know, if we're gonna send teams to the Olympics and LeBron is gonna spend all day with Kobe and Carmelo and what have you, then the players are gonna talk about, wouldn't it be nice to do certain things together? You can't, I don't have a problem with that. You know, especially, you know, there was, because of the large increase in television revenue, this last TV deal, there was going to be a spike in the cap. And that spike enabled Golden State to sign KD. And the league went to the union and said, can we agree to flatten out the increase in a certain way so there won't be a spike in one year and then down? And the union said no. And based on what I've read, to this day the union says we did the right thing, etc. But the NFL players union did allow this. You know. So I don't think it's going to happen too much. But it is what it is. And you know, when people complain to me about how large players' salaries are, I say, would you rather have the money go to the owners or the players? And then they think a while and say, I don't know, we'll think. Let's talk about it another time. And that's the story.
So earlier you talked about social responsibility, and you were the commissioner during like the Malice in the Palace. Recently, Kyle Korver wrote something for the Players Tribune and referenced like Russell Westbrook getting into it with the racist jazz fan. I was curious on your perspective on that sort of thing.
I guess what Kyle Korver wrote about, from his perspective to which he had been awakened, was, I think, what he described as white privilege. And I thought it was a very sensitive piece. It was well taken. And our players should not have to put up with the kind of stuff that they sometimes hear. We've enabled refs to throw fans out of the building. We have a sort of a quote rule of fan conduct, and our teams have to increasingly step up. But sports gives people a chance to examine their reactions and the like. You know, look what's going on in soccer. There are racist chants. They empty out buildings, soccer stadiums, because fans are shouting racist taunts at African players. It's disgusting, but at least it gets it out there what people are thinking and saying. It's kind of interesting. When Germany was playing Ghana in the World Cup of soccer, they handed out Afro wigs for the German fans to wear, which was pretty disgusting. Not they, the fans got Afro wigs to make fun of the Ghana team. And when they played, one of the teams played against Mexico, they were wearing uniforms with homophobic slurs on it. I'm guessing that one of the players was gay on Mexico's team. So sports is a place where if you want to engage the world in a single conversation, you can do it. If you want to show the world what still lurks in the mind and heart of man, sports is a good place to do it too. And so you gotta take stances along the way. Utah fans are tough in general. They used to throw popcorn at me. You know. The Boston fans are great too. They would, some investment banker in the front row turns around, his face is red, and his jowls are hanging, screaming at me because the officials have been sent by me to cause Boston to lose. It's not possible to send out officials so that every one of the 30 teams lose. But that's what the accusation usually is. So there you go. And it's not funny, but it's funny. There's usually some type in the front row who's paid $1,000 a seat with the suspenders on, who turns around and yells at me. I think one year my wife wanted me to get one of these arrows that you put on so it looked like you shot something through your head to laugh at him. But and sometimes it's the owner. But that's a whole other story. Anything else?
So you were the commissioner during the where Chris Paul was potentially going to be traded to the Lakers. So I was just curious as to how that kind of went down.
Actually, in my role as the owners representative for New Orleans, I decided that New Orleans wouldn't make the trade that was possible. It had never gotten any permission. And when they finally asked me about it, after a meeting in which we just signed the collective bargaining agreement, I said, "Are you kidding me?" As it turned out, I didn't think it was prudent for the team that I was supposedly in charge of, whose GM hadn't consulted the two people in the office who were in charge of supervising him, to trade Chris Paul, future Hall of Famer, for Lamar Odom, Kevin Martin, and Louis Scola. And I was right, actually. And I have a limited basketball knowledge, but I made that judgment. But I didn't explain it right. And so my head of public relations at the time said, "David, you're getting killed. You gotta just allow the trade to go through." And I said, "That's why they pay me the big bucks. And we'll explain it later after we make the right trade, not the wrong trade." And that was it. But that's the most asked question. That and whether the Patrick Ewing lottery was fixed by me by either heating or freezing the cardboard that was, it was neater, by the way.
But that's going to come up a lot again because of Zion and the Knicks.
Well, not only that, the Knicks invited Patrick back to sit for them on the lottery. Okay, so it's going to be kind of interesting. I'm going to get a lot of, it's on YouTube if you want to look at it, and it's conspiracy theory. You see, that's where he felt it, or that's where he tipped it, or that's where I did something, but it's not. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I know the NBA is expanding globally, and they announced the Africa League. I just wondered, how would that play out? If you know.
I have been Commissioner Emeritus for over 5 years, but I will say that I think that's a great move by the league. Virtually most years since we were there in '93, we have done a Basketball Without Borders camp in someplace in Africa, in Joburg, sometimes in Senegal, etc. And there's an enormous flow of talent that is not accessing the right training, nutrition, and things like that. And so I think it's going to be great. They're going to, invite a competition in, like they're going to get teams from existing leagues to come into this league. And the way it works in Europe for soccer and in basketball is teams play in their own league, and then they on the weekends, and then they play in the week in the pan-continental leagues. And I'm guessing it's going to be like that in Africa. And there are going to be many more players from Africa in the NBA over the next couple of decades. I have no doubt about it. I think it's terrific. I've worn them out, Bill. Go ahead.
There's obviously been a large shift in the way sports are broadcasted to the online platform via streaming services. Do you envision the NBA eventually shifting to 100% online streaming in their broadcast games?
Yes, but it depends what the time frame is for eventually. Because, I went around prior to my stepping down and talked about how the FANGs, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, etc., were going to get involved in sports. And they didn't. The only people that listened to me were Disney and Time Warner, which paid huge sums of money to keep the NBA. But after that happened, the other guys say, "What did we miss here?" And they're starting to get interested. And it seems to me that, Amazon is doing the digital rights for the Thursday night game to go with Fox, the NFL Network, and now Amazon. And Facebook is doing a baseball game, was doing a baseball game of the week. They cut back, they paid back to six games. Amazon has tennis in the UK, the ATP. So they're dipping their toes into the market. And it sounds to me like the NFL is going to opt out of its DirecTV deal, and they're gonna make a deal with either Verizon or AT&T or someone else. So we're going to see more and more streaming, which to me is synonymous with over the top. And as I was saying to Professor Squadron on the way over here, that we've been streaming games through NBA League Pass for well over a decade, so it's nothing new for us. And that increases dramatically outside the US. And do I think someone's gonna come and say, like Amazon Prime will do it all? Stream, whatever? Yeah, eventually it's gonna happen, because those are the people with the money. And you follow the money, you do. That's the other part of sports. You know, as Billy Hunter of the Union said, follow the Benjamins. You can see what's going to happen. And that's a subject that I've been interested in. I'm an advisor to a company called Fubo TV, which is a streaming service which shows a lot of soccer, but it also shows a lot of other games. And that's increasingly going to be the way that people are viewing a lot of things, not just, you know, you're viewing Netflix, you're streaming it. In fact, appointment viewing is getting to be a thing of the past, except for sports. And what I didn't mention is, you know, as the networks have realized the value of sports, I used to say in 1985, I used to say sports is the only thing that you can't use your VCR to tape, because everyone wants to enjoy the communal spirit of watching it together, whether you're in the same room or not. And I think, you know, and the thing I'm trying to rationalize in my mind about the future of sports is that, to me, I love all of the technology that's happening, but the most important technological advance to me in the last 30 or 40 years is high definition, large screen television and smart TVs. And there's ultimately going to be a way to, you know, to sort of weaponize smart TVs so that everything you can get on your iPhone or your iPad or some other device is available on your TV set. That's gonna be the home run to me.
We're getting pretty close to that now.
Yes, I think so, and it's fascinating to me, but we're not quite there yet. And most people, maybe of a certain age, have real problems finding out what's on and how do you get to it. You know, in my house, you know, I have DirecTV and cable, but that's because I'm getting DirecTV, I think, free as some remnant of having been commissioner once, and I guess they still do it. And then we have HBO Go, CBS All Access, Hulu, BritBox, Netflix. What's up with that? I don't even know what we're paying here. There's going to be a backlash. Okay, and we enjoy shows in each of them, but it's nuts. And then when I found out that something we're seeing on BritBox is available on Amazon Prime, then why do we have BritBox if it's available on Amazon Prime, but something else on Amazon Prime isn't available on BritBox? It's nuts. And there's going to be a shakeout in the world of delivery. And that shakeout may be that cable becomes more important, actually, as an arbiter of all the packages that you get when you get into your cable box. Because there's now, Comcast has its Infinity something or other. You speak into the remote control, and you don't have to look and see where the NBA game is on. You just say, Golden State, you know, and the next thing it slips to whatever channel Golden State is having. So the whole idea of voice and technology, but I would so much rather watch a game on a big screen. It's quite something. And you know that you're there with a group of other people, whether it's the Super Bowl, the World Series, or the NBA Finals. It's a big event, and it's fun, and it's very well produced. My successor is intent. He talks a lot about, and he's a good friend, he's doing a great job, about we haven't changed the way we televise games in decades. That is actually true, but the way the games are received is different than it's ever been, because I got 70-inch screen and 4K, soon to be 8K, is really nirvana, with your Dolby surround sound or your Beats by Dre on your ears, listening to the game. It's a fantastic experience, and as you can tell, I'm a big fan of sports and of basketball in particular. Sir, go ahead.
Do you envision the NBA decreasing the number of games played in the regular season in order to increase the competitiveness and just the product overall?
You know, that's what Adam keeps talking about. But I don't, it's one thing to shorten the game and play fewer minutes. But we've got arenas that were built around 41 home dates. And as soon as you start cutting into those home dates, you need a reduction in salary paid to the players. And as soon as you go to the players, they say, well, you'll agree that we'll shorten the season and your paycheck will be, and they can say, well, not so fast. It's just another trick by the owners to deprive us of money or whatever it is. And then they'll sue us or something. Oh no, we don't sue anymore, I forgot, they'll start an arbitration. But I don't think so. I can see shortening it, because at a presser after the owners meeting, Adam said something like reducing the games to 40 minutes. That changes every scoring statistic in the book when you change the game. Which we did with the three-point shot too, I guess. So, but even so, I don't see it. And I think, to me, technology is a big answer with respect to player health. Because there's stuff about sleep, load, strain, recovery. This whole notion of resting players is like a figment of the coach's imagination. In some cases, the player is just tired and he should be rested. In other cases, sometimes the coach doesn't want to show too much. So when Pop goes into Golden State for the last regular season games, he doesn't want to show exactly what he's going to have waiting in the playoffs. That may be blasphemy, but that's partially true. So maybe it wouldn't be a terrible idea. Although I think Adam has done a great job in he's lengthened the season a bit. They've cut out a couple of exhibition games. There are less 4 and 5 nights, less 3 in a row, that kind of thing. And I think that's something that should be very important on the agenda with respect to player health. And those are sort of new age issues. If you ask Michael Jordan, he would say, come on, they're making a lot of money, let them play. I did every night. Except he used to go to Atlantic City, and then he came back and scored 45 points. So he's my hero.
So back on the subject of the anthem, I read last year, it was in the 90s, there was an NBA player, a Muslim NBA player, who knelt down and kissed the floor in prayer during the anthem. And I was wondering if you could talk about sort of that situation. I'd never heard of it before, and it was a lot less covered. So we're talking about that. He
played as Chris Jackson at LSU, and in the NBA he was Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. And we knew that he was going to want to make a statement. And we said to him, you do us a favor and yourself a favor, don't come out of the locker room. And that's okay, you don't have to come out for the national anthem. Or you can come out of the locker room and stand in the entrance, the vomitorium, and not come out. But if you come out and you sit on the bench with the players, then when they all stand, our rule provides that you have to stand. There was a rule. And so he didn't stand, and then we suspended him. I suspended him for a game. Or for as long as he refused to stand, but it turned out to be only a game. So he came. And we said, look, you want to face away, you want to do whatever you're going to do, we're not going to impose judgment there, but you have to stand and come over and stand with your fellow players. And interestingly enough, in the context of Kaepernick, The NFL has so much control over a player when he comes out of the locker room onto the field. He can't wear a shirt that they don't approve. He can't wear a sneaker that they don't approve or a color that they don't approve. You know, I think if they had suspended him, he'd be back playing there now. But they didn't. And for good reason. They drew a distinction between a policy and a rule. We have a policy, but we don't have a rule. Suspend him because he shouldn't, you know, he's obligated to do certain things. And you know, in the NBA, maybe more so than the NFL or any other sport, because we only have, I'm going to say 11 players, 12 players, now it's 15 rosters. And our players are so visible, and we put such demands on them about appearing at the media, before the media. Even after shoot-arounds, before games, after games, they have an opportunity to express themselves in so many different ways, and we encourage them to. Say what you want to say. I think the players in other sports are a little more frustrated. They're not as recognizable, they're wearing long pants, long sleeves, hats, helmets, whatever, and so I think a frustration builds up. But I think that what he was doing it for is a valid cause, and you know, he should have done it, you know, should have given him a bigger microphone to shout about it. I think would have been better than because then, I don't know. Then the president ran with it, and there was a meltdown. How to deal with players kneeling and taking a knee, et cetera, et cetera.
We got time for one more question. Where are we gonna go? Anybody?
You again?
I have a straight basketball question. Who do you think's a better player, Michael Jordan or LeBron James?
Bill Russell. Next question, as Russell Westbrook would say. He's got 11 rings. He doesn't have enough fingers to wear them on. He's the man, okay? And by the way, and before Michael, there was Elgin Baylor, okay? And you could have seen him. And Dr. J was unbelievable. I mean, we have had the greatest succession of spectacular players. And I used to get great seats and go sit up close and watch them. What a job I had for 30 years. Now I get to visit with people like you. It's actually more fun, believe it or not. I enjoy it very much. So good luck to you in your careers, and thanks for choosing an interest in sports, because I think it's a great, you know, industry such as it is, and it has many lessons to both be learned and to teach. Thank you very much.
Thanks.